I don't know who's supposed to start because you're supposed to be the host, but I'm the one asking you questions today, Leighton.
Well, let's start with a little background. All right. This all came about as a result of the conference that I put on, which was back in 18, 19, and 20. And one of the things that I talk about or I spoke on was soil. What is it, right? And that's something that I think is the foundation of the horizontal soil system. Is that what is clay, what is silt, what is sand? So let's start with clay. A lot of people hate clay, especially people that live, like in Southern California with our high clay soils. They're very difficult to work with once they've become compacted. And the reason why is I want you to visualize a clay platelet looking very similar to a flying saucer. And you know what I should have done was gotten a whiteboard or something so I could draw it. But I think people have a good enough imagination. But think of it as a very, very thin platelet. And so, or thin flying saucer. So it's not very tall in the middle, like, some people visualize these flying discs. It's very thin. And it has what we call negative or positive charges around the outside edge of that circle. We assume it's like 100 parking spots, okay, where because it's magnetically charged, it can attract cations, which is some of your most important macronutrients, which is calcium, magnesium, and potassium, but also salt, and also there are some trace minerals that have a slight charge, positive or negative charge. So what happens when that clay platelet is in a healthy soil system? It stacks up because the outer rim is negatively or positively charged, and the center, top and bottom of that disc are negatively charged. So the clay platelet would stand, and then another one would stand on top of it because of those charges. During compaction, they're like this. And in most cases, overlaying, which makes it even more complicated. So if you draw 4 circles on a piece of paper, and then where those 4 circles, because they're solid, they can't really overlap. They butt into each other. But in the center of those 4 circles, the next platelet stacks on top of it. Now, how are you ever going to get that to unstack? And the only way you can is through biological properties. The biology have to get in there and start building biofilms underneath that center platelet to kind of jack it up. And eventually, over time, in a healthy soil system, especially when you have organic matter, dissolved organic matter working down in there, that helps to feed those bacteria. And they multiply like crazy and really push that thing up. Well, eventually it gets to a point where it's so far up and it probably starts to tip that, boom, now it's attached. So you have that positive and negative charge working together to create a column. And it just keeps going up and up and up. And what happens between the upright and the flat ones is you have like a channel, a C channel. And basically the bacteria get in there and create those biofilms. And now you've got a solid column. So it's not easily compacted. Now, when you start to use synthetic fertilizers, what happens is that column collapses, or when you till, it collapses because you knocked the thing over in scale. This is why, regenerative farming is all about no tilling and obviously no synthetic fertilizers, because that ruins tilth. We call, when you can stick your hands down in the soil, we call that tilth. And as a matter of fact, Kyle Moot, who's going to be coming on sometime soon, he's in the process of getting some tests done both on the soil biology through Andy Marsh, but also a company called Nestle's Dublin, who does nutritional testing for food. And we're going to be able to compare it against a synthetically grown corn. So that's going to be really interesting. But after 3 years of using dissolved organic matter, so compost extracts, fish brew, and all non-synthetic fertilizers like fish hydrolysate. And he did some trace minerals a couple of times. And he has a few other like seaweed extracts or kelp meals. Now he has tilth, whereas before, when I first started working with him, you couldn't get your finger down even a quarter inch into the soil. It was just we
Yeah.
call. And now you can just bury your hand in there. And when I asked him, well, how does it feel? He goes, it feels great, and there's worms and everything else. So this is what happens. It does take time on commercial scale, and he doesn't deep till. He does a light disking in the spring, just to get some opening for the corn seed to drop in
Hmm.
but for the most part, he no longer, really tills like most commercial farms do. But after 3 years of synthetic free, he's got tilth. And so we know that during that, those clay platelets are standing up and stacking up. And now, anytime it rains, that water's going down into the soil and filling up those aggregates like little sponges. So it really is the key, both to fertility, because those clay platelets hold on to those nutrients. They're not allowed to wash away. They're not mobile, and the only way they can come off those clay platelets is through biological forces like bacteria or root exudates leaking in the area of the clay platelet. And that's when the plant can really take control of the bank account, so to say.
Yeah.
So imagine you had 100 places around the outside edge of that, and obviously you have two places on the top and bottom, which will attract anions. And so, say, in an ideal world, one of the things I do when I do testing is I look at for a saturated paste test, and I look for the percentage. And ideal percentage is 70-75% calcium, 18 to 20% magnesium, and 8 to 10 parts potassium. And now the
Hmm.
plant can literally regulate. It has the ability to use calcium, because calcium is mobile in the plant, to knock off any salts. So again, just really building the whole biological system by allowing the plant to control and regulate what it uptakes. And of course, the bacteria are mining the minerals out of that clay. We all know, or maybe I should get into clay a little bit more. It's like, how is it formed? Well, typical soil science says that clay, sand, and silt are all based on particle size, which I disagree with because they
Right.
all have different properties. Typically, sand is inert, although there are cases like everything in nature. There is always outliers or outlanders or exceptions to the rule. Um, but clay is always magnetic, and silt is generally negatively charged. So here we got these positive and negative forces working together with each other to help, once that soil is healthy, to function as a drains, retains water, nutrient cycling, all the benefits, like i.e. in a meadow or a great prairie or a forest. Nobody's doing anything, and you don't see erosion. You don't see, the only time you see plants dying or shedding is due to seasonal causes. And let's face it, there's things in nature that are selected to die to make room for the next generation or the next succession of that soil system. So
Yeah.
there is always that going on as well. But the clay is generally formed through glaciers grinding rock against rock. And that's why you see that clay colored water, especially like in disturbed areas, for gold mining or other man made activities. The water gets very cloudy very quickly.
Hmm.
That's the clay, because the clay is so small that it stays suspended. And as a matter of fact, I've talked about this before, but one of the greatest studies that I came across a number of years ago was in Egypt. They had the deltas, some of the most fertile croplands, in Africa, and they started to lose fertility. And year after year, everything got worse and worse and worse. So the Ministry of Agriculture was called in to diagnose, like, why are we struggling, in this most fertile of soils? in Africa. Why are we going backwards? And so, after a lot of research and water quality tests, what they realized was that in the spring floods, they weren't getting what was called nano clay. I didn't even know nano clay existed until that point. So that's like a clay platelet that's even smaller than what we would typically see or determine as.
Would that be classed as a silt?
No, silt is organic matter, and we'll get into silt in a minute. But
Okay, actually, Leighton, because I want to pull us right back because we're supposed to be talking about building a horizontal soil system. So let's go right back to the very beginning. We'll get into the sand, silt, and clay in a bit as we build up. But let's start with talking about the base of a horizontal system, because you're creating a living, breathing ecosystem in the horizontal bed. But can you build one of these beds without having that tray underneath? That can somebody build a horizontal bed just in a normal garden patch?
oh, absolutely, you could build them on if you have compacted soil. Build it right on top of the compacted soil. Problem is that you're going to lose a lot of that water that you're trying to retain in the sand horizon, in the alluvial horizon, right? I mean, that's the reason why we set the liner of the tray quarter inch below the top of the sand layer, right? So that if you overfill your sand layer, you don't turn your A horizon into mud and have it go anaerobic.
Okay, so you can do it outside, but a lot of people are using them for inside, etc. So I've got a couple of ways that people are putting a base underneath. Um, your normal trays that you would have underneath an indoor bed. Uh, would somebody, like, if they wanted to build their own just out of wood, would something like a rubber coating work for making it waterproof?
Yeah, the only thing I'd be concerned about is that rubber coating gassing off or volatilizing the
Mhm.
actual components of it. I typically tell people, hey, go to Home Depot and get there's a plastic fabric that's used behind tiles, or go to a rubber roofer and ask for scraps, because we know those are going to last for a long, long time. Where the coatings can be, questionable, and more so because they're liquid. Um, After a period of time sitting in water, they may actually degrade. And
Right.
this is something about the horizontal soil system, is you don't want to do this twice. You
Yeah, you don't want to rip it all out. So, like, how about pond liners?
Sure,
Have you used any pond
bond liners
liners?
are fine. And again, like when during the manufacturing process of these fabrics, they get a chance to gas off. They get a chance to cure, so to say. So again,
Mhm.
it's I'd rather see you in a fabric than in a paint on coating. Does
Okay.
that make sense?
Definitely, definitely. So I before we go up, because now we've got our base, we're putting a tray, we're putting a bed inside of it. Let's talk about the drain, because you mentioned a little bit earlier that you never want to have the water come up past your rock and sand layer in the bottom, or your E horizon. What Where should that really be set? Should it be like a quarter inch under, a half inch under?
It depends on how accurate you are. Another thing that I tell people too is that level is really important. Plumb level and square, because if you're not plumb level and square, if you're sitting on a pitch, then you want to make your clay or your E horizon perfectly level, and then you determine what the highest part of that silt sand is, and then you drill your hole quarter, half inch, 3/8 below that, because you want the sand to hold the water. This is why it works so well, is because you can water it, fill it to the point where it's dripping out the side. Now you've maxed out the sand's capacity to hold water, and you can take off for 2 to 3 weeks. or 4 weeks, because you know you have that water storage capacity in there. And that's always been the biggest issue with any type of potting soil or soilless medium, is that the bottom goes anaerobic and the top goes hydrophobic. And as
Yeah.
soon as it goes hydrophobic, you put water on it, just washes off the sides of it, or off the top and down the sides. And that was,
So
that goes back to the conference when, people were complaining about the fact that, dealing with these, what do they call those things? They're not super sacks. They're cloth pots, right? Everyone was, in cloth pots up at Humble, and they were struggling with this. And I was basically explaining to them, is because as soon as that bacteria is no longer surrounded by moisture, it cysts and it turns into a wax. And between the waxy bacteria and the biofilms around it, it becomes like a tarp. Whatever you pour on it just goes right off. And now you have to use a surfactant. And there are some natural ones out there. So I mean, it's not the end of the world. You might have to, buy some yucca or one of these other ones to mix with your water to get it to create a coating and stick to it until you do get it to be hydrophilic again. But that's an extra step. That's a lot of extra work, right?
now you said that a person can go away for a couple of weeks. Are they like leaving, the water in there for those 2 weeks and letting it, sip up or wick up into the bed, or they're just getting it soaked and then draining out the excess?
That's one of the biggest complaints with tent growers. Like, they can't leave.
Yeah.
When they're in a grow in the middle of the cycle, they can't leave because you have to constantly monitor. Oh shit! When it starts to go hydrophobic, you got to get water on it real quick.
Yeah.
Or it gets worse, and especially in an indoor grow, you don't want water pouring off the sides of your pots onto your floor, especially if you're in a house, or basement might be okay, but garage might be okay, but you definitely don't want that in an apartment or any of these other situations where a lot of people are growing in tents.
Yes, definitely. And it's really, being able to take a 2-week vacation, away and know that your plant's going to be fine, is something that most growers would, well, they dream of that. That's like, I dream of genie. It's like, oh my God, that is possible. And with your system, you created it so that it can be possible. But the other question I had is, or at this layer, can we set it up? Because you are really into aquaponics, or that was your foundation for starting all this. Could this be set up to run in an aquaponic system with fish in that bottom layer, and you always keep it flooded?
So yeah, a lot of guys have taken totes, 275, 250 gallon totes, cut the top off of it, and then flip the top over to become the plant tray, right? And then they go with fish in the bottom, and they have a pump that cycles the water up top. So yeah, it's very easy. I think there's another system called the dual root zone. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. That was brought to America by an Australian gentleman who came over and met with a woman named Sylvia Bernstein, who was a mentor, very much a enthusiast for aquaculture and aquaponics. She ran classes in, I believe it was Colorado, many years ago. And so this guy wanted to tell her about his dual root zone. And it's kind of like a spin-off to some degree of a what's called a horizontal soil system, because you're basically flooding the bottom of the pot, and then what happens is you have a little siphon ball valve or bell valve that drains once it gets to a certain level, so you're not keeping it's underwater the whole time. And anyway, so this Australian cat brought it over and was talking to Sylvia Bernstein about it, and then one of her students caught wind of it and then ran with it and basically claimed it as its own. And I won't name that person because to this day that person still badmouthed me for reasons that are lies. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Jealousy, whatever. So anyway, that's another type of version of this, where you put all your plants in pots on a tray and you flood it and then you drain it, flood and drain. And that's basically, getting a similar situation because the pots are never allowed to just sit in water. And generally speaking, that they're using a potting soil. And this is going to help prevent that potting soil from going hydrophobic, right?
Okay, so they're using just they're not creating an actual ecosystem. They're just using like a super soil and
Yep.
keeping it moist so it doesn't go hydrophobic.
Right on, perpetual.
Yeah,
Anyways,
I wasn't gonna bring it up either, but So yeah,
well,
because I've done flooded drain. I've ran the bell siphons. I hated bell siphons in a hydro or an aquaponic system. I could, only get them to work so long, and then they'd always have a problem. So I like to run it just naturally, the water just flowing as like a deep water culture. But I just wanted to, because some people take aquaponics and they have it with their plants, and then I've seen people that separate it as an aquaculture and then use that water to water their plants. So they've separated the two. So in your system, you could actually do either or. You could just, because we want to keep it as a sip system and not have too much water coming from the top. So you could really, run both types as a pure aquaponics as your base, or just feeding it, fish water.
so the other thing about sips that make me very nervous is because they don't have that mineral in the water, um, they can go anaerobic very quickly.
Mhm.
And so I've never. And then if you get a plume of non-beneficial bacteria or anaerobes or even facultatives, you can get in trouble real quick. I mean, I there was a guy that I worked with years ago who was doing a giant commercial grow, and they were all sips, and they got a bug infestation. They
Mm.
had to tear the whole freaking commercial grow out and start over because you couldn't get rid of them. They would burrow their way up into the sip and set up shop, and you'd poison them, but they'd come right back. And so it was a disaster for that grow. And I think that grow went out of business after they, because you can't take a hit like that. You can't take a couple $1 million hit and bounce back. So anyway, that's my concern with sips, is that the mineral properties of the sand, silt, or sand and rock, for whatever reason, don't allow that anaerobic environment. And again, it's because you don't have the organic matter getting down into it. And again, the
Right.
sand is acting like a filter, right? So I did a project. Well, I designed it, I demonstrated, I did a what we call a prototype for a group in Connecticut that was raising waterfowl. And I told them, I said, look, all you need to do is create the sand filter. And sand filters have been around for a long time. I mean, they were even used in alternative septic systems. But the problem with them was that people didn't like going out there and raking up the dried out manure, when it was
Mhm.
done. In this situation, it was great because they could scrape the manure from the ducks off the surface of the sand and then throw that in their compost pile, and it was a wonderful fertilizer. So sand filters are something that's again been around a long, long time. I mean, probably back to Egyptian times or maybe even earlier.
Well,
So
look at your any stream that has a sand bottom. It's a filter, a natural filter. So it's really keeping with nature. Now, I want to, we've got our base. We're holding our water. We know we can use fish water. We know we can actually use it as an aquaponics at the base, as long as we're keeping below that rock and sand. So let's talk about the rock and sand for a minute, because there's a lot of different types of rocks here. I'll bring up a picture. This is a whole bunch of different types of rock, sizes, shapes. What should we be looking at, for the E Horizon, where we are building the sand and rock filter?
Diversity, diversity, diversity. And
And
what I
that's both
mean,
for the sand and the rock, or
generally, I tell people that, look, the colors of the rock indicate the mineral property of the rock.
right?
Deeper down the rabbit hole is the hardness, Mohs hardness scale. Like, different rocks have different hardnesses, right?
Well,
And you get in,
sandstone is really soft to dig through.
right, and you get into some of those sandstones or limestones. You're going to change your pH, right? Or it's going to break down. So typically, like, a sandstone is fine, but just understand that it's going to collapse because it's sitting in water. It's just going to go back to sand because you don't have the heat and pressure anymore.
Mhm.
Where limestone is going to break down and change the pH of your E horizon. So I typically say, and this is why I added rock to it, was for the mineral property, because the bacteria can mine that mineral out of that stone and release it, plant available when they're consumed by a protozoa.
Yeah.
And so typically for the sand part, I tell people you don't want white fluffy sand. That's a problem, right? If it's super powdery, you don't want it. You want a coarse, taupey, brownish sand. In some of those pictures, they look almost like you've got a little bit more pebbly than sandy.
Yeah.
Typically, like, I tell people, if you really want to do this up, you go to where like a river meets an ocean, or where there's an erosion site, and you have sand that's not underwater but right next to the water. You collect that coarse sand, and now you've got biologically active sand, right? You've already jump started your system by adding those biologicals. And when Shango was building his, and he did a whole podcast on Shaping Fire about building a horizontal soil system, he went on quite an adventure. Like, he went and got rocks and smashed them together, and he called me all complaining. He goes, "Geez, I didn't think of how hard this was going to be." I'm like, "Well, remember, if you're dealing with granites and you know, basalts and stuff like that, yeah, it's going to be a lot of work to break those up. But if they're softer stones like dolerite, or like lime, or not limestone, but sandstone, or some of these other rocks that are very colorful, are called conglomerates. Those just fall apart relatively easy. So you just happen to pick stones that were a little bit tougher to break, and so
Yeah.
that's where it goes back to the color, and spending a couple minutes on a geological site to really learn Mohs hardness scale, and what rocks are going to be harder to break up than others. And again, you don't want a super hard basalt in the bottom of it, because it's going to take the bacteria forever to break that down. You can always add basalt dust if you want. I mean, it's not, a lot of growers really speak highly of basalt dust. Personally, I think it's great. I mean, just get the flour version. Don't get like pebbles or gravel from it. You want something that's super, super fine, so it'll wash down into the soil profile, and not just sit on the surface. So again, the rock is there to provide mineral, and the more colors you get, the more mineral varieties you will get, and therefore the nutrient pool that's available for the plant would be greater, right?
Now you mentioned the acidity, and now I know people that have went out and they're looking for rocks for their garden, and they'll pour vinegar on the rocks and see if there is a reaction. Is that something that you would tell people to do when they're searching for rocks? Like, I live in the middle of, well, not the middle of Canada, but not close to the ocean, and my rocks here are going to be different from someone that is on the coast. Is that something you would recommend, is doing like an acid wash with the vinegar?
Well, it can't hurt, because generally what's going to react is the calcium, Right? That's going to be in your limestones. So if you're in an area like Tennessee or Nebraska or some of these other places, Virginia, that do have a lot of limestone, then that would be a very good idea to protect yourself from really screwing your pH up. Because again, you don't want to pull this apart. So
Yeah.
an extra step is encouraged by all means. If you're living in a more mountainous or volcanic area, then you have less of a concern for having a limestone in the mix, especially if you're going to a riverbed. Remember those rocks. Think of them as the knot in a tree, right? Whenever you split a wood and you know you hit a knot, man, or cut a board and you hit that knot and the blade starts smoking and screaming. That's because
Yep.
the knot is the hardest part of that wood. Well, those rocks are the knots of the bigger rock. So again, that's why when Shango was struggling and breaking his rocks up was because he was breaking knots up.
Well,
So
and that's a good point, is the size of the rocks, because like he was breaking them up to make them a smaller size. So what's a good size, would you say, for that, E horizon,
well,
for those
again,
rocks?
the E horizon is based on a unit of measurement called 124. So
Okay.
the depth is, if you're 24 inches, right? One part of 7 divided by 20, call it 28. 7 divided by 28 is 3, correct? No.
Don't ask me to do math live on air, Leighton. Come on.
Anyway, so if your E horizon, typically most people use 18-inch pots, right? And so, or let's call them 21. Um, your E horizon would be 3 inches, right? Because that's 7 divided by 21 is 3 inches. Your A horizon is going to be 2 parts. So that means it's going to be 6 inches deep, right? And your O horizon is going to be 4 parts. So 4 times 3 is 12. And that will round out to 21 inches deep.
Okay, so
Right?
that was 264?
No, 1, 2, 4.
124. Okay.
So whatever your depth of your pot is, divided by 7, and the E horizon is 1 part, the A horizon is 2 parts, and the O horizon is 4 parts.
Okay. And
Whatever.
you have to think about your base, your tray or whatever you built your
Yep.
base out of, to make sure that you're keeping that E horizon at the right level in your pot as well, or your water tray.
Again, if you go with a taller tray, you can just drill holes at that right level. Or if you use rubber, you can kind of fold it down at certain points so that it's at that correct level. So all these things need to be taken into consideration when you're building it. And again, the biggest piece is level, right? Because so many people are nothing's really perfectly level, right? Unless you're on a marble floor. So again, the way you compensate for that is you have a taller tray and you level your sand so that your beginning part, your 1 part, is the lowest point, right, or the highest point. And then you're using the sand to fill in the low parts so that sand becomes perfectly level. And now your tray could be 6, 8 inches tall. It doesn't matter. You just got to drill that hole quarter inch to half inch below the height of the level sand at any one place.
And that makes a lot of sense, because you never want that water to come up into the next horizon, to make it anaerobic. So that makes it a lot simpler for people, because people are going to use different materials. They're going to build them in different ways, whether it's out of concrete as the base, and to know that they have to stay that particular level down, so they never have a problem. Like, we'll talk about the sand now. You said chorus sand, and somebody was asking it's best to get it from like a river or a floodplain. but like I'm not close to either of those. So can I go to like I have a concrete plant really close, and they have sand. You know, am I looking for coarse sand, fine sand at
Never
the
fine.
seed level?
Never fine. Always
Never
coarse sand.
fine.
You want airspace or pocket space between the sand grains. That's why you
Okay.
don't want the white powdery sand. Plus, white, the primary, anytime you see something white, whether it's bentonite clay or that powdery play sand, they call it, there's no mineral in it. That's why it's white. It's void of mineral. Whereas red sand, you're going to have iron. Uh, yellow and taupees, you're probably going to have a little calcium. But there's again, you can search this, and everyone's got AI now. So
Mhm.
make sure you prompt it correctly because you don't want to get misinformation. But basically, you can ask it, well, what does the color of a stone indicate as far as the mineral value? And you'll get a full sheet of page that basically tells you all the different components of the colors. But typically, I just tell people, look, concrete sand, masonry sand, those are your buddies. Play sand, absolutely not. Do not go near
Yeah.
that.
Okay, so like if you're going out to say, you live in Hawaii, you're going down to the beach, that sand is pretty much washed out, or is that a good sand? Like I know we had oh geez, Cass Gilmore on, and for what they're growing, they're taking beach sand to put into their beds for the cranberries. you know where's the cutoff on that type of sand?
So the beach sand, people get concerned that it's going to have too much salt in it. But the reality, the fact is that that's more of like a C90 salt. So it's got a lot of mineral in it that's bound into the salt itself. The bad kind of salt is salt-based fertilizers. That's a different type of salt. So, not all salts are created equal, just like not all sands or rough stones are created equal. And
Hmm.
and let's back it up too, because this is a really important. These are two really important components of the E horizon that we need to talk about. Number one, do not use smooth stone. Smooth stones, the bacteria can't form a pocket and biofilm. And
Hmm.
so it takes them forever to get established on a smooth stone. Like look at your marble countertops or granite countertops. They're polished for a reason, or they're brushed, and the brushing does a similar thing. It creates a very hard surface coating that doesn't let the bacteria move into the stone and cause problems for you, and cleaning problems. So that's why you use polish. So never polished, always crushed or ground sharp, jagged edges. Um,
Hmm.
that's really important, and that was one of the reasons why Shango was smashing his rocks, because he was collecting these round rocks on the shoreline because there were so many different colors. And again, not realizing they were knots, and then worse yet, they were round, so he had to smash them because I told him,
Yeah.
do not use round stones in the E horizon. They'll be of no value. So there's that piece, and then another piece was years ago. I was supposed to be a consultant on a horizontal build, commercial scale, and I was cut out. I don't know exactly why, whether again it was ego or whatever. But bottom line was, this person who's very well known and well spoken in the cannabis industry or world, decided he was going to create a version of the horizontal soil system similar to hugelkultur. And he actually buried logs in the sand. And when I saw his post, I'm like, dude, tear that out, man. Don't do that. Get those logs the hell out of the sand. You're gonna go anaerobic. You're defeating the purpose of the sand filter. You want to add logs? No problem. In your A or your E is not a problem. But
Yeah.
do not get any organic matter down in your E horizon, or it's going to go anaerobic. Well, guess what happened?
It went anaerobic, of course.
Anaerobic. I got friggin' thrown under the bus, told that the system doesn't work and it fails. And this was after I freaking posted on his post, get those logs out. Do not put them in the E horizon. And so again, people, it's fine. You want to modify it. Tom modified his. He added more organic matter to his A horizon because he was having a problem with pH, and it wasn't affecting his yields, but it was affecting something he didn't like. The leaf, the big fan leaves had spots on them, and he didn't like it. So he's a perfectionist, and I deeply respect that. I mean, I'm all about doing it right. So, needless to say, there are ways to modify this. If you want to add your own spin to it, but the one thing you do not want to modify is that E horizon. You want rock of different color, and you want coarse sand. As long as you do that, as long as you wash the sand in, trowel it, pack it, tamp it, get it as tight as you possibly can, you'll be fine.
Well, and that's the next point I wanted to make, because I've watched you, build one of these systems, and like there's one on the Future Cannabis Project, and of course Shango, etc. But packing that sand in and watering it in, is a must do to have this work. And you want to actually literally pack it in so tight and fill it up with so much water that you literally have puddles on top to know that it's done properly.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, you don't have to make puddles. You don't have to go that far. You'll know when you've got it right. But the key is just to get all of those jagged rocks, make sure there's no pockets between them, and that's why you water it and trowel it. Are you okay, Paul? Oh boy.
Got something in the back of her throat?
Yeah, I think so. I think he ate a piece of grass. All right, do you need to throw up? Well, at least he's not going to throw up in my lap. Anyway.
Well, that's probably a good thing live on the air,
It might be worth a laugh. Anyway. Anyway, yeah, that's the key is you got to make sure that there are no voids. There's no pockets down in there.
Okay, now we add biology. Are we, when we're soaking that down, should we be adding that biology at that layer? Because I know you recommend fish brew. That's where we want to add that layer.
So what I recommend is spritz, right? You want it to look like a glazed donut. So you just mist it with a Johnson sprayer, Hudson sprayer, a little hand bottle sprayer. It doesn't matter. You just want to glaze it over. And I definitely recommend that if you're doing what we call lifts. So anything over 6 inches of soil is called a lift. So you want to spritz the E just because you can. But when you come to the A horizon, you want to spritz it once, and then potentially 2 or 3 times or 4 times on your O horizon. Because what I learned in building these soil profiles for high-end landscapers was that the best way to jumpstart them was to do it in lifts and then apply it. And typically, like on these giant commercial park renovations, that's what they do. They put 6 inches down, they bulldoze it in. They usually have low ground pressure tracks on the skid steers. But they do it in a 6-inch lift, and then they water it, and then they do another 6-inch lift and water it. So basically, they're again trying to create something that's not going to have air pockets or sink or settle on them after they install it. And ironically, this blew my mind. I was doing 266 Michigan Avenue, Canaan, and we were wrapping up the job. It was winter, or pushing late December, really getting into the heart of winter. And one of the guys, we were doing a really deep lift. We probably had 10 lifts on that one because it was an old parking lot where it was the only ground that was like the original compacted landfill. When they built this site, they just brought in trucks of fill from everywhere to build it up, right? But this was low compared to the rest of the landscape because the guy built a monster house. So he raised the soil up feet all the way around it. So this was like one of the original spots that we we were using as a temporary parking lot because the cars didn't get stuck there. And now we were filling it in. So we did about 10 lifts, and this was the centerpiece. It was basically like all trees. They called them floating hedges around it in a square. And this was the center lawn where they were going to put, their boys' little soccer nets at each end. One of the guys, and this was after terrific rains, decided to take the little excavator, which wasn't really little, it wasn't a tiny one. This was like call them small, but they're like 8 feet by 6 feet wide by 6 feet tall,
Yeah.
and decided he was going to drive it right across the lawn. And I saw him out of the corner of my eyes, and I started to scream at him. And he sunk the front end in, and like an idiot, he friggin' ripped it back and sunk the back end in, and kept doing this and buried the thing. I was like, oh my God. So I grabbed one of the other excavating teams that I had on the site. Actually, no, I had to call him. This was like on a Friday afternoon. I had to call him and say, dude, I need your help right now. Get out here.
Right.
He had a big machine on site. And I told him, I said, all right, from where we know that it's safe for you to pull this machine out, I need you to reach out. We got to chain this dumbass little idiot's machine and pick it up straight up. I don't want you plowing it through this whole lift.
Well, yeah, you don't want to be compacting it any worse.
Right. Or disturbing the whole area, right?
Yeah.
So we were able to get him up, get him out of there, and then I sent everybody home. We closed shop. And then I went back in, and I was all concerned that, because he sank it, he compacted the shit out of it. So now the soil had dried out, and we brought that. I jumped on that little excavator, and I went back in there, and I started digging around to see how bad it really was. And it actually wasn't too bad. I was surprised. So I just fluffed it up a little bit, and then went back to putting lifts on it. And then I just used the hoe or the bucket to pound it, because I didn't want to drive over it. I didn't want to disturb the whole thing again. So we went and did this lifts up again, and then came springtime, and everything was growing great, and there was never a soft spot there. So
Cool.
That's how well the lifts work if they're installed properly.
And that's what we want to really do with the E-Horizon, but not the A-Horizon.
Yeah, you want to do it on the A as well, and that's here again why you want to sprint it down with the biology. And then, tamp it lightly. You don't want to jump up and down on it, but you want it solid. You want it, solid, hard, not rock hard, but stable. I should use the word stable.
Okay. And that's one of the reasons, you use a concrete trowel to get it nice and smooth before you build your next layer.
Yeah. And the O-Horizon's easy. You just pour it in and you don't worry about it, right? Because it's all fluff anyway.
So let's talk more about the A-Horizon. We have the percentages for, the different layers for, how deep it's going to be. But let's talk about, the percentage of the sand, silt, clay, and organic material that we're going to be using in our A-Horizon.
So here again, this goes back to clay and why it's so important, because we're not compacting it. I tell everybody, if you're going to mine the clay, which is usually what I recommend, that you want to dry it thoroughly. You want to put it inside room temperature and dry it until it's fluffy, or leave it out in the hot sun till it's, again, fluffy, not wet at all. You want it bone dry. Otherwise, you'll never blend it evenly. You'll have clay pockets. You'll have clay balls throughout the Horizon mix. You don't want it. So again, clay is a very, very valuable component, both for mineral and for storage of nutrient. And, maybe it's time to dive in a little bit more about silt too. Silt is considered I consider it organic matter, according to, soil scientists. It's just particle size. It's particle size. Well, let me tell you this, man. You go out and you walk into the side of that river, you see that black layer, that mud. You walk through and you sink your foot in there and you pull it out, it's going to stink like hell. But that doesn't happen in sand. Like, even if like you're standing on the shore and your wave comes in and washes out and your feet sink down into the sand, well, I don't care how deep it is. It's not going to stink. It's not going to go anaerobic. So therefore, silt is organic matter. And that's something that, again, people don't understand. And where does it come from? Yeah, it comes down the river and gets smacked, as a log or trees or branches or leaves, whatever, and it gets smashed up and it creates that black layer. And that is pure silt. And usually I tell people, if you're going to mine silt, go to what's called an oxbow. So when rivers flow, typically they start straight, but eventually they start meandering and zigzagging.
Yeah.
So eventually they go straight again, and they leave this whole pocket, which is called an oxbow, where you can get pure silt from. And again, you can, reach out to your local geological office. What do they call those things?
Extensions.
Geological services. And you can
Okay.
find mines. You can find all cool shit from these guys. Like, oh, there was a soapstone mine over there. Or there was a quartz mine over here. And anyway, they will know where the oxbows are. And then you just go out there on a dry day. Again, you don't want to harvest silt soaking wet unless you're willing to dry it. All these materials need to be bone dry when you mix them, or you're never going to get it homogeneous.
Now, when I looked up silt, on the internet, it basically told me that it's not organic material. It's just very fine, basically rock particles, sand particles, and it had no, organic compound to it at all.
Again, my bitch with soil science. The foundation of soil science was created in the 1850s or something, maybe 1820s, and it's never changed, right? Silt will go anaerobic, sand won't, right?
Okay.
Just the basic, stick your hand in mud, pull it out, smell it. Smells like shit, right?
Well, I know I used to go out and walk, in Alberta, we don't have a lot of rivers, but your creeks, and you literally sink up to your knees in this muck, at the edge of a lake. It was all just a muck. And they're telling us that's silt, but it's really just organic material that's, gotten to that, particle size.
So again, this is why, the jar test is so valuable, because you can separate the layers, right? The sand will fall out first, then the silt, then lastly the clay. So if they're all particles of rock, why do they settle out differently? Why do they have different magnetic properties to them? Right? So soil science needs to grow the f up, because that's ancient knowledge, and we know so much more nowadays than they did back then. And thank God for the fact that there's this push to bring biology into the realm of soil science, because soil science basically told you, nope, parent material, chemicals, that's all you need.
Well, and I like what Squishy Mirror here says. All the man-made lakes around here are filled with smelly muck. Now, I watch a guy called Let's Dig 18, and he builds, huge ponds. And one of his jobs is to actually go in, drain them, and take all that silt out of the pond that is built up over years. So is that, if you knew somebody that was doing that kind of thing and had these, collection ponds, is that a good place to get silt, or you have to be careful?
A buddy of mine was a dredger, and
Okay.
he brought in floating machines, and he literally, the way he determined how much muck was to come out was he would use a stick and poke it down until he hit something hard, like a horizon or a sand or a rock. And that way he could calculate how deep the muck was, so he could figure out how many of these geo bags that he needed to pump into, because he would pump from the lake onto these giant bags on the side of the pond, and the water would slowly leak out of those without letting the silt come back in. And then once the bag was dry, usually 6 months, almost a year later, he'd have to come back and cut it and pull it off. But then he had this wonderful potting soil or garden humus, because it's all organic matter. How is that fucking rock? Excuse me. How is that rock? Right?
Exactly. I agree with you 150%. They just don't want to change the manuals, the books, and all of that to reflect the truth now, because like you said, it's from the 1800s and we're still dealing with what they thought back then. But it's good that people are listening now to you explain this, and it makes that much more logical sense. So let's get out of the silt. We know we can get it. I can go out to a slough or the side of a river, a healthy lake, and I can get this muck, dry it out, and use that as my silt. But we are also putting in the clay. Now, at the very beginning of the show, we talked about clay, a bit, but let's go more for this specific purpose of building the A Horizon. It's multiple different colors of clay. Now, some people would think all clay is the same, but say you have a red clay and a brown clay. Can you explain some of the differences, or should we be looking for all kinds of different clays in our local environment?
Did you flag perpetual's last question on the perched water system, water table?
Let's see.
There's a little question mark next to it. Is that you?
I hadn't. He just put in a question mark.
Okay,
so
yeah. So flag that one. We'll get to it.
Okay, I will do so.
Right. So back to clay. Clay is definitely mineral. Absolutely. Like sand, like rock, it's mineral. So the different colors are indicating of different values, different mineral values. So yeah, I'm all about diversity. Again, don't use a white bentonite clay, right? And those unfortunately are wet, but they almost look like extracts.
Yeah, I think this is more for the potting and creating pottery, but I just wanted to give people an idea that there is different types of clay, and they come in all kinds of different colors.
Absolutely. So, again, just take into consideration. Oh, this is a great one. Oh, there was a stone called Negro McQueen. It was a black marble that was very popular in a certain time back when I was cutting stone. And when I cut that black stone, it smelled like swamp. I shit you not. The whole shop stunk like that anaerobic swampy smell. So there's mudstone. All right. So that top left corner of the black, that might have actually been a mudstone, not a clay. And the reason you know it's a clay is because you can roll it up like a snake. If you can't roll that stuff up like a snake, or only kind of, then it's contaminated clay. It's not pure clay. Like you can get silt worked in with the clay, just like you can get sand worked in with the clay. And if you're making that snake and it feels gritty, well, you got sand in there. Or you roll it up and it just kind of falls apart and falls up. It doesn't really make a snake. Cheetah, knock it off. Sorry, guys. There's nothing. I can't mute myself. Hey, knock it off. Don't get pissed at me.
He's giving you attitude, Leighton. You're giving him attitude.
Totally. He's a Chihuahua, man. I swear they're crazy little dogs. Poe is so much different than he is. But anyway, so again, the goal is to find the purest clay you can. And if you go along a riverbank, you will see big clumps of clay. And generally they'll be colored. They're not mined like bentonite. They're just part of a soil formation. And you could tell because you can roll it up like a ball and spin it out like a snake, and now it's clay. And again, the more colors that you get, the more diverse mineral profiles that you'll have.
And is this something that you can go and buy at a local place, like a concrete plant or an arborist?
No, the way to get clay, and there's very few of these guys out there, is basically golf course builders or golf course building suppliers, because they do blend in the clay. They understand the fertility value of it. So they do add a certain percentage into their soil blends. So it gets a little tricky. Now, fortunately, I have unlimited sand silt clay here in California. And I put it out on the net years ago that, hey, if Someone wants me to build a horizontal system, I can build it for you. I get it really close, but the shipping's going to kill you, right? It's going to murder you.
Yeah.
But I can build you the A horizon if you're limited. If you're in a city and you don't have the ability to go out and you're only in a tent and you only need X amount of square feet, then it's definitely doable. Again, it's just going to be expensive to ship it. So that being said, yeah, diversity in color for the clay is really important. The blend, ideally, you want in your A horizon 50% sand, right? That's kind of a foundational component because you want it to be able to drain. And if you get much lower than 50% sand, you're going to have drainage issues. It's not going to wick, and it's not going to drain as well. So then you have your organic matter profile, which is 20%. Although I'm pretty confident to say, based on Tom, that could be increased. Now, this is where the math gets a little wonky. So basically, he doubled his organic matter in his A horizon, but we just added more. We didn't like try to get the percentages to be perfect because it won't work. Like the percentage values that I came up with was 50% sand, 20% organic matter. And then it was 17% clay because I want the fertility, and 13% silt because I don't need a lot of organic matter, in the form of silt. I want some because again, it has a negative charge. It holds on anions, so you want that. So those are the basic ratios, and does it have to be perfect? No. I think even if you have like a clay silt combination, as long as you're 30%, you're going to be fine. And if you want to double the organic matter, it throws the percentages off. But you just instead of saying 20% organic matter, whatever the volume of that 20% is, just add another volume of that, whatever that volume is. Does that make sense? So like
yes and no. Like, okay, so you got 50%, 13, 17, and 20. If you want to add more than that 20%, you're going to need to, because you've only got the 100%, you're going to need to reduce it somewhere else. So should you like take a couple of percent off of each one of the other ones?
I guess that would be the only way to do it, right? But again, if you're doubling the organic matter, now you're really limiting. You got to have the sand. Sand is important for drainage. So now you're limiting your ability for mineral production in the silt and the clay. So now you're down to what, 10%?
Yeah, because you're making more like a super soil than a true A horizon.
Correct. And again, it had no effect on his yields. He did have a pH difference, but it only just showed up as spots on his leaves. So again, we're studying this. Like he's supposed to come on sometime soon to talk about. I believe he's halfway or 3/4 or maybe fully through that run where he made those adjustments. But he promised to come back on, do some testing, and then come back on and talk about what changed or how it's working and give us.
I've reached out and I'm going to try to have him on next Monday. We're going to try. We do have Josh from Yellow Skunk Farms coming on in 2 weeks' time to talk about how he built his horizontal system, and it has his second run is absolutely amazing. His turtles, they're doing great, but if we're changing these percentages in some ways, yes, it's working for Tom, but we could end up having situations further down the line that that's where the experimentation comes in. But we've mentioned a few times or had a few shows with people doing biochar, and I know Dirt Right, who we had on a little while ago in his system, he put in a lot of the biochar. Is this something that, that it's really newer than from when you built this originally? Would you want to put that biochar in, as a percentage, or would you want to add it in to your organic matter layer?
I would add it into the organic matter, to be honest with you. I mean, yeah,
Okay.
it's great for biology to set up shop on it. But again, at the end of the day, you want it in the root zone, not like, not that the roots aren't going to get down to the A, but bottom line is the top 8 inches is where most of the magic happens.
Yeah.
The vast majority of the magic happens in that top 8 inches. So if you want to add biochar, I would add it into the O horizon. It's long-term carbon, right? I like short-term carbon. I like dissolved organic matter. That is a dissolved organic carbon. That's the chocolate water. I actually have a bottle of it right over there, but I'm not going to bother with it.
Josh wanted to tell us it's his 4th run in his system, by the way.
Yeah, looking forward to catching up with you again, buddy, when you come on. But anyway, back to the question. So biochar, yeah, in the O horizon for sure. And I would, if I'm a first time going about this, I would stick to the original formula because I've had no complaints whatsoever until Tom ran into that spot. And again, it didn't affect the yield, it didn't affect the quality, it just affected the plant in a weird way. And his pH was a little bit lower than it was supposed to be in that horizon. But that could be due to the cultivar. I don't know. There's a lot of questions involved there, and we'll know more when we get him on the show. But again, give him time to get all those testing in and make sure that he's through his run, so we will have good information to share.
Okay, perfect. Now, what's my and guys? I actually wrote down a whole bunch of questions to try to go through, this on a step by step. We've talked about silt, we've talked about the sand, we've talked about the clay, the organic matter. Now, a lot of people, and like we just mentioned this as a super soil, but the organic matter that we're putting into that horizon, can it just be straight compost, or we want to build a super soil?
I recommend I like either super chunky compost. I don't want fine compost. I want super chunky. I want pieces of chips and not fresh chips. Fresh chips will steal nitrogen. You don't want to use those. But really good chunky compost, yeah, you could use that whole thing, or you can add some core. I'm a big fan of core. I love cocoa core, especially if it's from agro cocoa.
Cleaned and washed, yes.
Yeah, he does not grow in brackish water. His core is from Mexico, not from Far East, Malaysia and Vietnam and stuff like that. There they're growing it in mangrove swamps and stuff like that. So you're getting brackish water. Because they're shipping it overseas, they compact it to 15 pounds of pressure to get as much of that shit in there as possible. And he compacts to 10 because he doesn't want to destroy the fiber and the hair and the water storage capacity and the nutrient value, blah, 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 blah. So, and another thing that he has too is he has chunky core, which is great because now, again, the chunkier it is, the better it's going to drain, the better it's going to function. But I'm a lot of guys want to use super soil for that top layer. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that as long as it's not synthetically altered. If it's a true super soil that's being made as a regenerative approach, they're using mineral powders and rock dust and stuff like that. That's fine. That's good. I'm not a big fan of peat moss because of the destruction of the peat bogs. Although there is that cat where is he from? Minnesota, New Age. He's been on the show. He has some kind of super peat that he gets that's so biologically active.
The cell saviors and soil saviors. He's actually That's sphagnum peat moss, actually out of northern Alberta, and they only take so much because it grows back. It's still alive. It's the dead peat bogs that are being mined that can't come back. That is really, devastating. Our aquifer layer.
He said it wasn't sphagnum. It was something different, and it was not out in Canada. It was in the U.S. We're gonna
Okay,
get.
well,
Yeah, we gotta
yeah,
get.
I'll have to get. I know Will reached out to me, and he's the one actually putting these formulas together. And he's the one that told me it's coming. That component is coming out of northern Canada. But yeah, Pat Militich, we'll get him back on soon too, because they've got a lot of new products that they actually have gotten online, and people are able to buy now.
But I
Yeah,
thought, because I've microscoped peat. There's no biology. There's bacteria, but that's it. There's no advanced biology whatsoever. And I swear to God, he said that this is like just biological, off the charts. But
well,
again,
because it's still alive. The stuff they're using hasn't been fossilized. It's not dead. It's actually still alive. So the biology is still actually there, building cells.
gotcha. Well, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, that's a question that we not need to revisit at some point in the future.
So I want to still stay with the E. If somebody was mentioning they wanted us to go over the layers again, it's the E horizon, the A horizon, and the O horizon is what we're focused on. Correct?
Yep.
I didn't miss one, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, unless you call a living mulch, like what we call, that could be considered a layer. I mean, that creates microclimates with the cover crops. So that
we haven't got up to that layer yet. So mulch is coming.
Yeah.
So let's
recommend mulch. Absolutely to the top of it.
Oh, you have to have a mulch layer, but let's stick with the organic matter that we're putting into the A horizon, and we can use a super soil, but you would more recommend a compost that's really
not
a
pure
lot of larger.
Yeah, but not pure compost. Like I would say, you want at least 50% something like core, or even pit moss. That's another one that's available. Again, I'm not a big fan of peat, but you do what you want. A lot of super soils are peat. But I would definitely want 30, 40, 50% really good biological compost that's chunky, but you also want another, again, diversity. You want something that, like core, that's going to drain, have some nutrient value. And again, peat moss has very little nutrition. Like, it's nothing. It's the old stuff. Now, I don't know about the guy that's pulling from a living bog, but that's a conversation for another time.
Yeah, it's somebody wanted me to put up the image here.
All you got to do is search, just Google soil horizons.
Oh, I've got it here. I believe me, I keep all this stuff in the background so that I can bring these things. It's like what's in the sand, for the components. But
there you go.
The basic layers. So in reality, is the R or the bedrock what we're calling the E horizon?
No, bedrock is bedrock.
Okay.
I don't know why they don't show an E horizon in this particular picture. A lot of them do, because it's basically where the groundwater travels, right? So the water sinks through all the soil profile, and either it goes to bedrock, but more often than not, it goes to groundwater. I mean, in the 1800s, everybody had just a hand dug well, because that's groundwater, right? You didn't have to go down thousands of feet or hundreds of feet to get to the water.
Mm-hmm.
So that E horizon is the groundwater level, and it's usually after the B.
Okay, so it's really in this this area down here.
Yeah, usually. But it could be a layer right above the bedrock.
Well,
right?
because it looks here like the sea layer here is got like rock and sand. It visually, in my eyes anyway, they're kind of showing more of a rock sand layer.
Yeah, yeah. Again, it's kind of, this is old science.
1800s, yeah,
It's
yeah.
old science. Again, it's so you have to just take it. I mean, if you search horizons, you're going to see a lot of them.
Oh,
Typically, the page is
yeah.
full, and they're all going to show something different. But anyway, so the E represents, an alluvial layer. That's what the E stands for. A and
Okay.
B just mean A and B, and O stands for organic matter. And as you notice on that picture, the organic matter was very small. It's very, because that's nature, right? Nature just drops leaves, and those leaves and sticks and twigs get gobbled up by the biology and fed to the plant. So
Yeah.
typically in a nature, your O is going to be very small. Now you move into the prairies that haven't been tilled or destroyed, and that friggin' O layer can be huge. It can be, feet deep.
Yeah.
So, because every time the plants grow during the summer and then they fall over because of the snow, they're just getting slowly converted. They are pure O, they're pure organic matter. And so, that's why the central southwest was so fertile. I mean, there's pictures of guys on horseback in the 20s, and all you can see is their shoulder and their heads. That's how tall the prairie grasses were growing. That's why it was so capable of pulling water out of the air. Even though it was arid and dry, the tree, the actual little stalks of grass were harvesting water out of the friggin' atmosphere. And now you go in there and the humidity is like single digits. Back then it was probably double digits, but it was still very low. But because of that amount of plant growth, it was able to function very, very well. And then when we tilled it, it was super fertile for the first years until it hit dust bowl time.
Yeah. Well, because people don't understand that plants are actually breathing out of their stomata, and they're drawing that moisture in, because the moisture is in the air, and then it's being held there and re-released and then brought back in. It's a bloody cycle.
Dude, think of them as little magnets. Like, you should see some of the water harvesting techniques they're coming up with nowadays. They put like a
Yeah.
small charge in these nets, and it
Yep.
literally pulls the humidity out. So those plants had little charges to them. They did
Yep.
little electrical charges that sucked in those water molecules.
Well,
Anyway,
and
that's a
there's
whole that's a whole
yeah.
nother hole.
But we could talk about that another day, because I like, yeah, fog harvesting and all kinds of stuff. But that's
Even in deserts, dude. In
yeah.
deserts, you can do it.
Yep. So we basically covered the components that are going in our A horizon. Let's talk about mixing them. Every single one of these, whether it's the sand, the silt, the clay, the organic material, you want that 100% dried out before you
Well,
mix it.
organic matter, no, doesn't matter.
No?
Organic matter can be moist. We don't want the organic matter hydrophobic, right?
Okay.
It should be moist. Like, I don't want to be able to make a mud ball out of it, but you basically want that organic matter to have the clay and the silt and the sand stick to it, because now you're building a perfect system for the bacteria to have clay, sand, and silt right in their organic matter.
And we're putting it in as layers. So I wanted to talk about how to mix it, because we've got our percentages. We've got 30% sand, etc. You can put it in a 5-gallon bucket and go, okay, 30% is so many buckets, and etc. But we're drying these materials out, and I know silk can be extremely fluffy. Would it be better to, when we're measuring it, to do it by weight instead of by volume or 5-gallon buckets?
High volume, because sand will overthrow everything, and you'll never get enough organic matter because it's so light. So that's why it's got to be by volume, and you got to mix it thoroughly so it's homogeneous. You should see no color or variation in the A when it's done.
Mhm.
You know, People have used cement mixers, mortar mixers, 5-gallon buckets with a paint mixer. Any of these things will work. And again, you just, do your volume measurements and your percentages, and then mix them thoroughly so it looks uniform.
So now, like I said, with the silt, it can be very fluffy. So you're going to want to really push these materials and make it, half-assed compact before you put them together.
I don't like to compact any of the materials. I just want to pour them in. I mean, I might push a little bit, but I'm not going to pack it by any means. Again, it's the volume that matters, not the weight. And if you start packing it, you're creating more weight.
Okay, because like a lot of people have made major errors in putting these together, and I want to try to clear those, errors up as much as possible. And one of the other things, and I was going to mention it earlier, in the transition from the E to the A, some people have put in the cloth. Now, like a weed barrier, and is that a no-no? Because you're trying.
Why? You're exposing your plant to plastics and microplastics. There's no need to put anything down. The E horizon is a filter.
Okay.
It's keeping the organic matter out. And hey, some roots are going to get down there, and that's fine, because the roots are going to get gobbled up by the bacteria, and they're never going to become like a high concentration of organic matter. And then as you water, the sand is just going to fill that little void back in again.
Okay, so it wasn't going to be like, say somebody put a jute mat down there, over top of the sand and rock. Is that going to become a problem as an anaerobic zone?
All right,
jute,
I would be very careful, because certain jutes have like toxic coatings to them, right? If you used a pure hemp fabric, sure, but again, why? Why are you adding that extra step? You don't need it.
Okay, I think that's the point. Is you don't actually need it, and in a lot of ways, you don't want it.
Right, biomimic nature. Nature doesn't lay down fabric anywhere. She just builds the soil up.
Okay, I guess that was a point I had in my head, and I forgot to write it down in my questions. So we got it covered now.
Well, speaking of questions, dude, I think I broke a record here. 22.
Yeah, and I don't think I haven't. I'm trying to keep up with the questions, but I haven't. There's a lot, and there's another one that just came in. I'm not even reading them. I'm just putting them up, but we're not quite to the questions yet. We may have to. Your puppies may have to take a walk a few minutes late today, because I want to talk about the O horizon. What should that O horizon be? Compost? Is that where you want to put, your main super soil? Is that, tell us what the O horizon should be, Leighton.
Well, again, diversity. I think it should be 20 or 30 to 50% compost. I think it should be 20%, core, 30% super soil. It's really up to the people. I mean, a lot of people just use pure super soil at that point for the O horizon, and that's fine too, as long as it's not been killed or fertilized with synthetic fertilizer, salt-based fertilizers. You'll be fine. And again, diversity, just all of this, diversity. The more diverse it is, the better off you're going to be.
Now, for anybody that doesn't or hasn't heard the term super soil, basically it's a pre-made soil where you're throwing in, everything into it, and the kitchen sink beside. So your rock dusts, your green sands, all the different nutrients that you can possibly think of, you're throwing in there. And I want to point out, if you're building your own super soil, or even if you're buying it, or you use it, compost it for 30 days so that it's really truly biologically active, before you're using it. Because if you're just throwing it on, and you can have a lot of problems. You can have a lot of fungus gnats come out, etc. Where if you compost it properly for 30 days, you're not going to have so much of these problems.
Agreed. It's called cooking it down. And
Yeah.
build my own super soil and watch as many as you can, because there is, a lot of misinformation out there. But typically the way they did it was they mixed it into a kiddie swimming pool, mixed all their ingredients together, and waited till the temperature dropped to ambient. And that's cooking it off,
Yeah. And then I know what I did was 55-gallon drums, and I made compost bins out of that so I could actually roll it. And, I would let that cook for 30 days, but I had like 30 different components that I was putting in, everything from, blood meals, alfalfa meal, all these different components putting in there. So it's all about having all those different building blocks for the plants to, access to build healthy cells. But guys, there's a whole bunch of different videos on building super soils, and you can buy them pre-made. So we won't go into that, but let's cover the mulch layer, because there's a lot of different things you can use as a mulch, into your living mulches as well. So these are just some pictures of different types of mulch, from, rice hulls, straw, etc.
So I love what Josh Deansland did in his garden. He threw down just all kinds of different seeds and just let whatever grow. And, he realized some of these things worked better than others. Like, radishes were good. Some of the fescue grasses got too tall. Again, we'll cover a lot of this with Yellow Skunk Farms, because he did a great job of diversity. Like, he's got a freaking jungle in there. So you can do anything. If you don't want a living mulch, plant life or cover crop, then I would go coarse, chunky, old chips, like something you see on the side of the highway. You don't want them new. They will bang you up hard because they'll steal the nitrogen. So old, punky chips are great. Or chips that have been sitting around for 6 months to a year, they're fine. Go to your local tree guy and see if he's got some old chips somewhere. Or you can buy. There's all kinds of decorative mulches that you could buy at Home Depot. But the coarse, chunky chips, you want a couple inches, 2 to 3 inches is fine. You just don't want your horizon to be exposed to direct sunlight and oxygen, so that it really dries it out. And you'll see.
That's what I want to point out, guys. Compost is not mulch. Get it out of your heads to use compost as mulch. You don't want your compost to dry out.
Nope, absolutely not.
Okay, I think that was because I had wood chips, coconut coir mixed in with it, and a living mulch for the mulch layer. So I think that pretty much covers all the different horizons that we're putting in. So is there anything before we get to questions, Leighton, that you want to point out for people?
No, I think I got the one that I really wanted to hammer home is the value of clay, and how important it is and how it functions to create the structure of the soil. So that was the important piece. And now we're at 25, and we're right at the right point. So let's get into this, buddy.
Well, we'll jump into the last question that just came out from Squishy Mirror. Thoughts on using cardboard as a mulch?
That's fine. I don't think that's a problem. It's just going to keep the sun or your lights or your sunlight from getting down and cooking anything too bad. It might not be very sightly, but sure, why not? You can cut it, trim it so that it fits around the plants. And again, the goal is to keep your compost covered. You just don't want your compost exposed to the air.
We got a statement here. Most cardboards have forever chemicals. I'm not sure if that's actually true.
I don't know. I mean, the colored ones, yes. The brown ones, probably not. These paper factories, you should see the sludge that comes out of them, because they're getting rid of all of they're getting rid of a lot of the stuff when they process it. But I think the brown cardboards are safe. Just you don't want any ink. Well, ink is mostly soy now, so you don't really have to worry about that. But if it's wax coated, don't. Absolute no. If it's got tape all over it, remove the tape.
Yeah.
Or any labels, get rid of them. Again, I'd rather use natural products, not cardboard, but for to each his own.
Well, yeah, and guys, it's exactly that. Pick your battles that you can win. If all you've got is cardboard, then yes, you're going to use it. If all you've got is, say, wood chips, then that's what you're going to use. But remember, it's all about diversity, in the building blocks that the plant needs. And cardboard is basically 99% carbon, which is definitely good. But just, think before you do these things and do a little bit of research. But guys, I'm not going to take any more questions. We've got 24. So let's get started on those. And the first one again is that dang squishy mirror. I sort of made a horizontal system in my raised beds, sand, silt, clay, and rotten wood. And so this is a statement he made right at the actually before the show even started. And we kind of covered this, but he's doing a raised bed outside and he hasn't built the E-Horizon. So that should
fine.
be.
That's fine.
Yeah.
You don't need the E-Horizon as long as it drains. Like people talk to me about, oh, I did this hole, threw a bunch of logs in there, and I built a hugel pile. No, you didn't. You built a swamp, dude. Because if that soil isn't draining, that whole thing is going to go anaerobic. Hugel culture was on the surface of the soil. They didn't dig pits. They just laid down friggin' old rotten logs and threw soil on top of it. So just keep that in mind. If you dig a hole, you better make sure that drains, or otherwise you're gonna have problems with it. Raised beds are great because even if the soil doesn't drain, eventually the soil will start to drain as the biology moves into it. But you're never going to have a problem if it get a heavy rainstorm. Water's just going to leak out from underneath it. So you're all good there, buddy.
Okay, cool. But just don't put any rotten logs in your E-Horizon.
No. No organic matter in your E-Horizon.
So Mad Dog went, what would be a good thing for a small greenhouse like a 6x6? And this is questions from back at the beginning of the show.
So what I recommend is 4, because 6 makes it very difficult for you to reach in. So most guys do 4 foot and then they stagger the plants. That way you can reach all the way in and do your lollipop and pruning or planting or removing of cover crop, whatever, or amending. So 4x6, 4x8, 4x whatever length you want.
And remember, you're putting a tray underneath there to hold the water that you're putting in. So consider that in your, that's one of the reasons that, Leighton and I would both recommend grassroots fabric pots, because they can be customized to fit into the area that you want. So if you're doing a 4x4 bed, you're going to want to have, 5 or 6 inches surrounding that for the pan underneath. So if you're buying a 4x4 pan, you're not going to want a 4x4 bed because it's not going to work. You're going to want a 3x3, and Grassroots is somebody that can actually create that for you.
Actually, I would recommend that they do like 3/6. So all you need is a couple inches to see down into the tray. That's all you really need. And you can always push it back or put a little pipe in there to hold it, because the super sacks or those fabric pots do kind of expand out as the soil gets older.
Okay. So Squishy Mirror, bentonite clay, is that some of the clay that we would want to use in the A-Horizon?
That's white. Anything that's white is not good for what you're trying to do. Bentonite's great for like cleanses. That was a big thing in California for a while. It's great for natural swimming pools or ponds as a liner. But don't use bentonite clay as your clay source. You want color.
Okay. Yeah, something we have mentioned, and even Tom was putting a tube down to take a look down underneath. You mentioned putting a PVC pipe in your pot vertically to see the water level, so when you water on the podcast in the past. Would you put a bottom base pipe on top of the E horizon? That makes
Um, no, I wouldn't put it on top. You want it to go to the bottom of the pan or the bottom of your pot. Um, and I've seen guys actually do a styrofoam ball with a little stick on it, or two styrofoams, one on the top, one on the bottom, and that way it goes up and down. They can actually see the level instead of having to use a flashlight, which really isn't going to tell you how deep it is anyway. You have to use a dipstick. So either one of those is fine. I mean, again, the whole goal is, if, as long as you have the hole set at the right level, you'll see the water drip it out. So you don't really need that pipe. But hey, teach their own.
Well, I think, and I know when I built a system, it wasn't a horizontal system. I was using that as where I could fill my water reservoir in the bottom, because I didn't have a pan in the bottom. I think the pan, if you're using that as watering, because you're watering from the bottom, I don't know that you would really need to have something like that.
The only reason you might need it is if your fabric pot is the same size as your pan, because you can't see down it, can't get your finger down in between it. So, again, as long as you have your holes at the right depth, you don't need it. But if you're worried about your holes overflowing on your, living room floor, then yeah, put that. If you don't have a space so that you can see it or get your finger down in there, then use that in that case, in that scenario.
Okay, and that makes perfect sense. So, next one is, what happens with the roots that stay in the bottom of the system? Could they get something? Could they get something anaerobic going?
Actually, I've seen this before. That yes, the roots do potentially get down into that sand, top roots especially. But what happens is that there's a coating around that root called the rhizosphere, and as soon as that plant has been harvested, that rhizosphere is going to just consume that. It's just going to turn it into food as the plant ball starts to rot. It'll just rot, and that organic matter is gone, and the sand will just push back in as it gets wet and dry. So no worries there. I've never had anybody have any issues with roots. The only time I've had issues is with someone buried a log in the horizon.
Okay, perfect. So, squishy mirror again. If you had to apply your system to a parcel of land that is mostly clay, would you add sand over the clay before trying to develop topsoil? View decomposition of plant matter and adding compost.
So that could be taken a lot of different ways, but typically, like I've seen out here in California, we have horribly compacted clay soils, and I had some people build raised beds and do the horizontal system on it. It didn't hold the water as well as with the pan, but it did hold water, and it did work. And then eventually, they could just like stick a stake right down through the compacted clay, because the biology got in there and got the clay to stand back up again. So, do you need sand? No, but can you use sand? Absolutely.
Yeah, because I know in Alberta here, I have heavy clay soil, and I know a lot of people, when they're trying to get their lawns just perfect, and they've got dips, they'll actually bring in sand and spread it out to make things more level. So sand is always going to be a bonus. It's got a lot of different building blocks, and I've brought up the Sparks sheet where it shows all the different things that are in a grain of sand, and it's amazing for a warehouse of building blocks for plants. So we should use beach sand.
Coarse sand. A lot of beaches have powdery white stuff. Do not use that. It needs to be coarse sand.
And it's like our rocks. We don't want smooth rocks. We want rocks with lots of edges, so the biology can get in there and build condos, okay, to mine the different minerals that are there. So next, I've had some living soil recipes with basalt in it have higher heavy metals in it, and with final cannabis product, could something be put in to mitigate the heavy metals?
Biochar, that would be your buddy. There's also I was just dealing with this. Compost extracts have shown some really beneficial in making the heavy metals non-bioavailable. Now, in some cases, they can actually increase the bioavailability of lead and arsenic. So you have to be very careful about creating that kind of situation. But any mineral you're going to use, you got to be careful. I mean, yeah, there's heavy metals in kelp because they uptake it. Comfrey is loaded with heavy metals because it uptakes them. So yeah, it's a challenge if you're in a commercial grow and you're trying to stay within legal limits, which by the way are ridiculous. They're designed to prevent you from getting into the industry or from taking your product away from you and bankrupting you, because there's lead and friggin' arsenic everywhere. Dude, we went to unleaded gasoline for a reason. Our soils are polluted with lead beyond because of all of our friggin' lead burning friggin' automobiles. And let's face it, the production of petroleum, you're releasing a ton of lead and arsenic into the air. So
the lead paints,
from
the past.
Well, you know why they banished the lead paints?
Well, because we were creating Faraday cages in our houses.
That's exactly right. They couldn't spy on us.
That's totally off topics. We'll
go back to the next 17, and we got we have a little over 15 minutes. Let's see if we can bust through these.
Okay, so Farmer Cheryl, can any KNF inoculant be used in the Horizon? Which is best, or can one just use vermicompost?
So KNFs are generally not inoculants. They're called preparations, so they're for fertilizing. They're alternatives for feeding your plant instead of using a synthetic fertilizer. I don't know a single KNF that is an inoculant. Now they have ones that are like bacterial food. I forget all of the different names and terms. But no, I'm a big fan of worm castings. There's amazing work that's been done on the benefits of that for plants. But again, that's a fertilizer. It's not an inoculant. If you want an inoculant, you make a really good compost that has high levels of protozoa and nematodes. That's an inoculant.
Well, I'm not the guy, someone that has done a lot of the Korean natural farming. A lot of it you can add as foliar sprays, and that's really what they were meant for. But you can add those all together, and when you're mixing up your A Horizon and moistening up your A Horizon, because they're made from biology, whether it's a fish amino acid or a water soluble extracts for calcium or phosphorus, mix that in with your water when you're moistening things, and then you're adding the different biologicals in the different layers as you build them. And that's something I think we really needed to point out. We talked about fish brew, etc., at the the E Horizon, between the E and the A. But when we're moistening that A Horizon as we're building those layers, what are you recommending for an inoculation in those layers? Like
every 6-inch lift. Remember, every 6-inch lift, make it glisten like a glazed donut. That's ideal. Okay. Not soak Perfect. It, just make it glazed.
So then, is it okay to use EM1 in the bottom water in the long run?
Yeah, EM1 is fine. EM1 is 3 different types of bacteria. They're going to get down in there anyway, whether you water them in or whether you spray them on the sand or whatever. No, the EM1's fine.
Perfect. And so let's see. I'm not sure what is meant here. So, Leighton, do we have
So there's
bird?
this guy, uh, Chad or Tad, Kiss Organics, that has, again, I don't know whether it's jealousy. I don't know what his problem is, but he attacked me on saying, "Oh, this is a perched water table." Well, you'd have to understand what a perched water table is and what it was designed for. It was designed for exactly like SIP tables. So it was used under putting greens, sports field, like the Yankee Stadium. They had a perched water table. Um, but no, this is different because those soils are engineered soils. They're 98 to 99% sand, 1% organic matter, no clay. So this is a completely different system than a perched water table. And if you Google perched water table, they'll explain this all. It's common knowledge. It's for engineered soils. I'm not engineering a soil. I'm creating a soil profile that mimics nature. Totally different animal.
Creating a living soil system from all the different layers of the biology that are necessary for it to cycle properly. So, Squishy Mirror wanted to know, can you use the bentonite clay as your liner?
Yeah, if you want to. I mean, that's not a problem. I mean, as long as you don't have animals that are gonna burrow through it. I mean, that's always been the biggest issue with bentonite clay as a pond liner, was that you still got to use like all kinds of wire mesh cloth, and pretty much you should be using stainless steel because otherwise it's going to rot. And then as soon as that rots, you're going to have ground squirrels and mice and rats, chewing at it. So your call. I mean, that it would be a lot of work to use bentonite versus just a liner or a tray.
Okay. So, quartzite cannot be used.
All right, quartzite and schist are completely different. Schist is a pretty soft material. You can easily split it with a an axe or a hammer. Quartzite is freaking indestructible. It's super super hard. It's actually used as countertops and it's quite beautiful. So those are two different animals. Again, get yourself a quick guidebook or a field book on minerals and rocks, and you'll see there's just thousands, well, yeah, probably thousands of different types, because you have metamorphics, which are a mix of sedimentary and igneous, and in different proportions, they create different hardnesses and different mineral properties. And I've had stone that I cut with a grinder that actually expanded. It was wild. And that was another property of sand, of clay, that people don't understand. When it gets wet, it expands, and that
Mhm.
compacts it even more as it's pushing against itself. So anyway, two different minerals, but yeah, get yourself a guide. Geology is really cool.
Well, and we want all kinds of different rock and more variety, just like our biology. We want variety, biodiversity. So, Farmer Cheryl, can the clay from the horizontal system be from the compacted area, even though it has problems? Would the horizontal system improve the clay? Just asking to save time and money.
Yeah, yeah, we talked about that. But building raised beds on top of this hard pan clay out here in California, and it just loosens that clay up over time. So, will the clay compact in the horizontal soil system? Absolutely not, because it's going to be attached to the organic matter, and it's going to be stacking like it's supposed to in nature. As long as you don't compact it or use synthetics, you're going to be fine.
Okay. And then her next one, have you ever encountered clay that after a heavy rain is like walking in quicksand?
All right, that's complicated. Yes, clay when it rains becomes slicker than ice. So if it's squishy, it may probably have contained quite a bit of clay, but it's not probably pure clay. It's probably a combination of other things. Again, pure clay will roll up like a snake in your fingers, where these what we call contaminated clays that have sand will feel gritty. If it has silt, it'll fall apart. It won't stick together. Just think about pottery, right? If it rolls like a snake, you know you could use it for pottery.
Okay, cool. Now this next one, if the E-Horizon does get anaerobic, how will we know, or how can we check if it's anaerobic if the plants start showing there are problems?
Use your nose. Your nose knows. And that's the whole point of using rocks and sand in the E-Horizon. It creates a barrier from going in. It can't go in. It's basically like groundwater. Well, before we effed everything up, right? Groundwater was the purest water. Everybody drank it right out of their well. You could drink any stream or river or lake you wanted until we had mass expansions and started using chemicals. So, again, the way nature cleans water is through the biology and through the organic matter. And once it gets through those layers and it hits the E horizon, it's crystal clear and it cannot go anaerobic because of the minerals. And there's a great video called The Symphony of the Soil. About halfway through that documentary, which is free on YouTube, you'll see a gentleman doing an experiment showing you how organic soils filter water. And it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. Highly recommend you watch it.
And if you guys want to see something else that's pretty bizarre, you can look at filtering water, where guys are literally taking, a branch from a tree, sticking it in dirty water, and having the other end come into another glass, and how the plant literally will take out the dirt and different contaminations, and you end up with pure water in the other end. So our plants can actually purify water as well, just in their cell structure.
I'd be a little bit careful of that because it doesn't have enough time to break down anything that's really, man-made toxic that you can't see or taste. Yeah. So that's where nature will do it for you. And you can create an experiment yourself and clean your own water by doing exactly what he did in that experiment. So just pouring it through a very biologically active tilth. Soil tilth is the key to the whole thing.
Yep. It's amazing what Mother Nature has set up, that we just have to open our minds and start using it. So, is it okay to use a metal steel container with this system?
Well, you're going to rust. So, again, then you want to paint a coating on it. Well, that coating is going to break down and could release other things. I wouldn't use metal unless it was stainless steel, and that would be incredibly expensive.
Well, I know they're selling a lot of raised beds to a lot of homeowners and homesteaders that they're putting out in the open.
Yeah, the galvanized ones.
Yeah, the galvanized.
So galvanization is okay. It has, I think it's nickel and tin, but there is a little lead in it. But if it's sitting on the soil, that's fine. If there's water sitting on it, that's a problem. It's going to rot.
Okay. Let's see. I wonder if Spanish moss could be used.
What, is a ground cover? Is that what you think? That's what he's asking?
I think that's when we were talking about the peat moss.
Okay, so I thought Spanish moss was a living moss, not a dead moss.
I've never dealt with Spanish moss at all, so that's way out of my pay grade.
Sorry, Squishy Mirror. I don't know what to tell you on that one.
Okay. Will the roots in the E-Horizon go anaerobic with time? Maybe using SFL100 or some other enzymes to help decompose the roots. I see them coming out of the side of the bottom of the pot.
Well, what you're seeing is air pruning happening. That's one whole issue. But no, again, to repeat myself, if the roots get down into the E-Horizon, the rhizosphere itself will consume that root matter and send it up as the plant is still trying to survive in the root ball. So it'll decay very, very quickly. And I've seen it where literally 2 weeks after that cannabis plant was harvested, there's very little root ball left at all. and the sand will just push right back in, and then you'll be fine. The key is you don't want silt to get down in there, and that's why it acts like a sand filter.
So the next one, any important advice for us running them already, not just putting them together? Do you think the soil test between the runs is a must? And can I just wing it or do the test once a year?
I get that question a lot. And, to be honest with you, it's up to you. Are you pushing the plant or are you stewarding the plant? So that's up to you. You want to push that plant, then you want to get testing and you want to add nutrients between runs. But if you're just like nurturing the plant, you're just being a steward and letting the plant do whatever it wants, then it's going to have enough minerals for 1,000 years in the soil system, in the clay, sand, and silt, and organic matter that you top dress, because you are at some point going to have to top dress a little bit, because as that organic matter gets consumed by the plant, it's going to go down naturally, not through compaction, through consumption. Big difference.
Yeah, definitely a big difference. And then you're going to want to, top dress. That's one of the reasons, like, we talked about, your mulch layer and a living mulch, but can you spread like a compost in that living mulch to bring that back up? Or do you think like a total chop and drop and add a layer of compost and then another layer of mulch would be better, Leighton?
I think, personally, chop and drop, just cover that with chips. You don't need to add another compost. If you're adding compost because it's been consumed, that's a different animal. And you'd add a layer of compost and then add another layer of chips, because those chips are going to break down eventually too. So you're going to have to add compost and chips at some point in the future, or compost, or chips, or compost and then cover crop. But either way, that's really up to you. But I think the most important thing is just remember, you want to keep the compost covered at all times. You do not want it to be exposed to light, and let it just naturally do its thing.
Cool. So we're getting to the end of the questions. Been using my Horizonal SIP for 3 years now. All is good, but wondering how would grab a soil sample to test.
So that's easy. You want to just, get a little spoon or something, bend it at a 90-degree angle, just dig down about 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches. That's the way you get the soil sample. I mean, I'm assuming you don't need to test your water. But if you're concerned, if the plants aren't looking good, then I would try to figure out a way to sniff the water just to make sure it wasn't going anaerobic. Again, that's why those minerals, the sand and the rocks, are so important, because they create a mineral environment where the water cannot go anaerobic.
Perfect. No, guys, we have 54 comments in the live. I'm not even gonna go back to it because we're at the end of the show. But Leighton, this has been an absolutely brilliant show, and I think we've covered all the different steps for a person that was wanting to build a system like this. I think we've covered everything that was really necessary.
Well, there's still 2 more questions if you want to grab them.
Well, actually, it's only showing me one that have got starred, and it's actually more of a statement. Somebody that's looking for guests that Mad Dog wanted to point out to us.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, well, thank you guys for participating. It's always a pleasure sharing knowledge. It's what I'm pretty much here to do. Yeah, the system, again, is biomimicry. It's nothing special. I didn't invent this. Nature invented it. Gaia invented it. I just applied it, and the reason I applied it was because I'd learned this, or was forced to learn the hard way, with architects inappropriately planting, and when I questioned them, they would be just, oh, whatever, just throw some dirt at it. And I was like, that's not going to work, man. I understand geology, hydrology, and all of this stuff, and no, you can't plant a swamp maple and surround it with boxwoods that want their feet dry, and then put it on one friggin' irrigation system. I'm going to have to modify the soil. And they're like, well, do what you have to do. And so I started playing with these different, methods of dealing with these inappropriate planting regimens or regimes. And then when I got involved with the cannabis industry and heard, the horror stories they were having with these pots, the fabric pots, and I was like, well, duh. I mean, it's the reason why it's going hydrophobic is because you don't have biology, you don't have mulches, you don't have what you need to protect it. And I go, plus, shoot it with a heat gun. And they're like, why would I do that? I go, trust me, you go out there in the summer and you shoot that friggin' that pot sitting on top of the hard compacted soil, and I'll bet you the temperature is like 120, 130. You're cooking everything. And sure as shit, all of a sudden people started posting on Instagram these laser heat guns showing just how hot those pots got. And I'm like, surround them with hay. All right. Use soil. There's other things that you can do to prevent this. Personally, I'd just rather you go in the ground, right? Mimic nature. Don't fight her.
Well, and that's one of the things that the Horizonal system has really created is a complete biodiverse system that we can all use. And like, guys, we've been talking a lot about, the larger containers, but you can do this in, I think, a 6-inch pot. Would you think?
I've done it. All my house plants have been upplanted and I use the Horizonal Soil System. So it can be used in a 4-inch pot. Doesn't even matter.
As long as you have the percentages right, it's going to work for you.
Absolutely. And what's crazy is that, like the tomatoes and sand experiment, we documented how biology can convert sand into silt and clay. We increase the percentages through the roof on both of them. So again, it's all about the biology, right, Ken?
Exactly. Without the biology, we don't exist because the biology controls cell division, and we're all just a bunch of cells, same as the plants and animals.
Yep. I'm into that. And I love that comment that I made with Kip on the phone was like, or Kip on the podcast was, all right, so if the soil on top is newer than the soil underneath, where did it come from?
Mm-hmm. It's all about the biology, guys. Okay. We're going to stop there. Andy and I should be back on this Wednesday if California doesn't drop off into the ocean over the next couple of days or the Cascades blow up. We'll be on Wednesday, and we're actually going to be talking about mulch. So you guys are going to want to check that out on Wednesday. The ladies with chiropractic is sexy. They're back on Thursday with another show, and then I'm actually on Sunday with Dr. Paula on her show on Sunday. We're going to be talking more about biology and the human body and how this all correlates and comes together for all organic life on our planet, guys. So you're going to want to all check those shows out. But guys, peace out. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and New Year's, and we will talk to you soon.
And as always, Ken, thank you for all the hard work you do behind the scenes to make this happen each and every week, brother. Much love and respect.
Thank you. Okay, guys. See you later.